This happened to me a couple of weeks ago, and despite what I want to believe, I think it's still an ongoing issue. I don't exactly live in the woods, but my house sits on the outskirts of what I'd call a nature-filled suburb. Lots of trees, wildlife, and that sort of thing. One side of our house borders what you could call a small patch of woods. It's not a forest by any means, more like a quarter-mile stretch, separating our property from the neighboring road on the other side. That road connects to another street, and across it lies this massive body of water I've always been curious about. Growing up, I assumed it was a reservoir, since there are tons of no trespassing and government property signs posted all along the fence that surrounds it. But here's the weird part. The name of this supposed reservoir isn't listed on Google Maps or Apple Maps. And if it really were an official reservoir, it definitely would be. I've searched it up multiple times over the years and never found any official information on it. Still, its mystery has always been a topic of conversation between my siblings and me. I'm on varsity cross-country at my school, so I'm constantly looking for good places to run. That wooded area became my go-to route, a perfect 2-mile loop through the trees, along the road by the water and back around. It's much quieter than my actual neighborhood, which has no sidewalks, twisty roads, and drivers who go way too fast. The season was approaching fast, so I'd recently ramped up my runs. The day everything happened, I could have sworn I heard rustling behind me as I made my way back through the woods after a run. But I figured it was just an animal. Fast forward to that night. During the summer, I always sleep with my windows open. I love the sounds of nature at night, especially when it rains. And that night, it poured. A massive thunderstorm rolled in out of nowhere, and it was glorious. I lay in bed listening to the rain and thunder until I started drifting off. That's when I heard something that definitely wasn't part of the storm. At first, it was faint, a soft, sobbing sound, but it didn't fade away. The longer I listened, the more it sounded like it was coming from right beneath my bedroom window, and the more clearly it became human. Then, cutting through the sound of the rain, I heard a voice, a soft, female voice. It said, clear as day, "Can you help me? I'm cold." I've never moved so fast in my life. My instincts took over before fear could even settle in. I jumped out of bed, ran to the front door, and sprinted around the side of the house toward my window. The rain was coming down so hard I was soaked in seconds. But I didn't care. As terrifying as it was to hear that voice, I didn't think it was anything sinister. I just thought someone was in real danger. And then I saw her. Huddled right beneath my window was a woman. She was wearing white, maybe a nightgown or a dress, and crouched under the small overhang, trying to stay dry. I approached her cautiously and asked if she needed help. The whole situation felt like a fever dream. Then, suddenly, everything changed. As soon as she noticed me, she sprang up and rushed straight at me with this burst of energy I wasn't expecting. I barely had time to react. I braced myself for impact. But, mid-stride, she hesitated. Maybe she realized how tall I am. I don't know. But instead of colliding with me, she veered off sharply and darted toward the woods. I just stood there, frozen in shock, watching as she disappeared into the darkness, running impossibly fast for someone barefoot. I didn't follow her. I went straight back inside, dripping from head to toe, and woke up my dad. When I told him what happened, He was just as freaked out as I was. We went around the house, making sure every door and window was locked tight. We talked about calling the police, but it was already after midnight. By the time they arrived, the woman would have been long gone. Besides, searching those woods in the middle of a thunderstorm seemed pointless and dangerous for whoever had to do it, if they even agreed to. So, we decided we'd just deal with it in the morning if necessary. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep again. The next couple of days were completely normal. My dad and I chalked the whole thing up to one of two explanations. Either a homeless person looking for shelter, or someone in the middle of a mental breakdown. But what happened that night wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. About a week later, I went for one of my usual runs. As I made my way up to the connecting road, I glanced through the barbed wire fence toward the water. To my surprise, there was movement near the edge. I slowed down and then stopped completely. Sitting on the shore with her bare feet dangling in the water was a woman. I froze. My stomach dropped. How was she even there? That fence doesn't have any holes, not that I've ever seen. And it's topped with barbed wire. The thing's at least 10 feet tall. It should have been impossible for anyone to get through. I must have made a sound, maybe a gasp, because even from that distance, she suddenly turned her head and looked directly at me. And in that instant, I knew it was her. The same woman who had been beneath my window that stormy night. The moment our eyes met, she stood up, then bolted straight toward the fence. Her movements were wild, frantic, almost inhuman. She pressed her face against the chain link, smiling at me. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was twisted, wide and empty, like she was trying to imitate what a smile should look like. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. I yelled that I was calling the police, hoping it would scare her off. And I guess it did. Because the second I said that, she turned and dove straight into the water. The sound of her body hitting the surface echoed unnaturally loud across the still air. It didn't feel right. None of it did. My instincts screamed at me to get away. I called 911 immediately, trying to explain what had just happened. I kept my eyes on the water, but before the police arrived, she disappeared, slipping out of sight like she'd been swallowed whole. When the officers finally showed up, they took my statement and said they'd investigate the area. Then they told me to go about my day normally, which honestly shocked me. How was I supposed to act normal after that? I haven't seen her since that day. But lately, I've started hearing noises outside my bedroom window again. Not crying, not like before, but faint sounds of movement. Someone shifting around out there. It's making me paranoid. I just know something else is going to happen. I've even stopped running because I can't risk running into her again. I keep telling myself she's just unstable. Maybe she followed me home one day. But there's one thing I still can't explain. How did she get to the other side of that fence? My sister and I have spent hours searching for a way in, but it's impossible. There's no opening, no gap, no break. My cousin Nick, who's a total conspiracy nut, swears the reservoir is hiding something. Some government secret, some restricted experiment. I've always laughed it off, but now I'm not so sure. Because for the first time in my life, I don't feel safe in my own home. I'll just go ahead and say it. I'm a middle-aged man in a failed marriage. My wife and I fight over everything. I can't even remember what started it this time. Probably something stupid. But, like always, it escalated until I stormed out of the house. That happens more often than I'd like to admit. Usually, when things get bad, I just grab a hotel room for the night. But this time, I didn't want her chasing after me or trying to fix things. I needed real distance. So, I decided to head somewhere she'd never think to look. A piece of property I own out in the middle of nowhere. I'd been meaning to repurpose it for something, though I'm not even sure what it used to be. The previous owner had passed away, and his estate practically begged to sell it off cheap. From what I could tell, it might have been an old shooting range or a storage facility. The building itself is strange, a concrete block structure with a few warehouse-style rooms downstairs and an office area upstairs. Despite only having a handful of rooms, it feels huge, cold, empty, and echoing. I figured it was perfect for a night alone. There was no way my wife would ever find me there. The drive took about 20 minutes along long, desolate back roads. Halfway there, I noticed dark clouds gathering above me. By the time I pulled into what was once a cracked, overgrown parking lot, thunder was already rumbling in the distance. I found my spare keys hidden behind a loose piece of siding, right where I'd left them. By the time I got inside, the rain had started falling hard. The metal roofing made it sound like someone was dumping gravel across the top of the building. I set up in the upstairs office, where there's an old cot. Not fancy, but good enough. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt at peace. The rain outside was steady and soothing, drumming rhythmically against the metal roof. The storm made the place feel sealed off, like the rest of the world didn't exist. But, of course, nice things never last. Not for me, at least. Just as I started to drift off, the sound of shattering glass tore through the storm. My heart slammed into overdrive. I froze, straining to listen through the roar of rain. It was hard to tell where the sound had come from, but it was definitely from somewhere downstairs. I keep a hunting rifle in one of the rooms below, mostly so my wife doesn't know I own it, and I wasn't about to ignore it now. Moving quietly, I grabbed it and crept down the stairs. At the bottom, I stopped and listened. Nothing but the storm, no footsteps, no voices, just that endless rain hammering the roof. I decided to search the place, room by room. The air felt heavier with every step. Finally, in the back room, I found it. One of the boarded-up windows had been smashed, a hole punched through the wood, and glass scattered across the floor inside. But that was it. No footprints, no open doors, no sign that anyone had actually come inside. And the hole was far too small for a person to fit through. Still, my nerves were shot. I double-checked every door, every closet, every dark corner. 20 minutes later, I hadn't found a single thing out of place. I told myself it was probably just some local punks, kids throwing rocks for fun who bolted when the window shattered. I found a piece of cardboard in another room, taped it over the hole, and headed back upstairs. The rifle stayed by the cot this time, just in case. But deep down, I wasn't convinced I was alone anymore. I'm not sure how long I'd been lying there, maybe an hour, when I heard what sounded like footsteps moving below me. It was hard to tell over the rain, but it wasn't just random noise. It was rhythmic, slow, careful, like someone walking under the cover of the storm trying not to be heard. My pulse spiked instantly. I grabbed the rifle again and crept towards the top of the stairs, staying as quiet as possible. This time, I didn't dare go down. I just listened. The footsteps stopped, but that didn't make sense. There was no way they could have heard me from up there. I stood frozen for what felt like 5 minutes, sweat dripping down my forehead despite the cold air. Silence. Only the pounding of rain on the metal roof. Finally, I forced myself to move. I searched the entire building again. Every room, every corner, every shadow. But just like before, there was nothing. No footprints, no doors open, no sign anyone had ever been there. I started to wonder if I was losing it, or if whoever had been inside had somehow slipped out before I noticed. But that didn't explain one thing. Every single door was still locked from the inside. That thought sent a chill down my spine. I decided to check outside, hoping for something, anything. The rain was relentless, coming down in sheets as I circled the building with my phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but all it revealed was mud, puddles, and overgrown weeds. No footprints, no vehicles, no sign of life at all. I'll admit, part of me wanted to find something, just to prove I wasn't going crazy. I went back upstairs and tried to rationalize what I'd heard. Between the storm hammering the roof and the way old buildings creak when the temperature drops, there had to be a dozen innocent explanations. I told myself I was paranoid, just a tired, angry man jumping at shadows. I climbed back into the cot, forcing myself to relax. The sound of the rain was almost hypnotic again, and for a moment, I felt calm enough to drift off. But then, I heard it. A deep grinding sound from below, not footsteps this time, furniture. It was unmistakable. The heavy scrape of something being dragged across concrete. Long, drawn out, deliberate. There was no mistaking that sound. No storm in the world could make it. My heart pounded so hard, it felt like my ribs might crack. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the rifle, threw the blanket aside, and stormed downstairs, flipping on every light switch I could find as I went. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was angry, furious that something was toying with me. "I'm not messing around," I yelled into the echoing dark. "I'm armed, and I'll defend myself and my property if I have to." My voice bounced off the concrete walls, then died into nothing. The lights flickered, the rain pounded, but there was no response, no movement, no intruder. Nothing had been moved, just silence. You might be wondering why I didn't call the police right then. Honestly, I thought about it. But what was I supposed to tell them? That I was hearing noises in a half-abandoned building in the middle of a storm. And besides, the property isn't exactly up to code. That's putting it mildly. The last thing I needed was a visit from inspectors or a report filed with my name on it. So instead, I stood there in the middle of that cold, empty building, clutching my rifle, and realized that I'd never felt more alone. The last thing I needed was to bring any official attention to the place. But standing there in that empty building, rifle in hand, yelling into the darkness, something suddenly shifted. In an instant, my frustration turned into pure, cold fear. It wasn't just a change in emotion. It felt like something icy washed right over me. I could feel it. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to get as far away from that place as possible. I don't know what triggered it exactly, but I knew I had to leave. I quickly gathered my things returned the rifle to its hiding spot, and turned off all the lights. The storm was still raging outside, but I didn't care. I locked up the building and drove home through the worst of the weather. It's been a little while since that night, but I plan to go back soon, maybe in a few days, whenever I have time. I want to investigate properly this time, maybe install a few security cameras to find out if something's really happening there, or if it was just my imagination. As for what actually happened that night, I have no idea. Either someone was there and managed to hide from me, or I'm starting to lose my mind. I don't know which is scarier, and honestly, I don't even want to think about the third possibility, because that one terrifies me most of all. My name is Jason. I live in a pretty rural area, the kind of place where you have to drive half an hour just to get to anywhere remotely interesting. This happened 3 Fridays ago. My buddy Leo and I had gone to a small house party a few towns over. It wasn't anything crazy, just one of those chill backyard gatherings with beer pong, music, and too many fairy lights. A little too college style for my taste, but hey, there's not much else to do out here. I was the designated driver that night, nursing the same warm beer for 3 hours, while Leo got progressively louder, drunker, and more philosophical with every cup he downed. By the time we left around 1 a.m., he was absolutely plastered, which was funny at first until I realized I was now his babysitter. After dragging him away from the girl he'd been flirting with, I shoved him into the car for the 20-minute drive home. But by then, the weather had turned nasty. What had started as a light drizzle was now a torrential downpour. Visibility was maybe 30 feet ahead at best. I had to slow down to barely 30 miles per hour on roads I'd normally tear through at 60. Leo, meanwhile, was being Leo. First complaining about my driving, then the music, and finally, how badly he needed to piss. I told him we were 15 minutes from home at most, but he wouldn't stop whining. His tantrum was unbearable. After 5 more minutes of it, I gave up. I pulled over on a random stretch of road, surrounded by what looked like cornfields. Though it was hard to tell in the dark and rain. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. No houses, no streetlights, nothing but farmland stretching endlessly on both sides. I told him, "Go ahead, get soaked for all I care." But he wasn't listening. He was already halfway out of the car before I'd even finished talking. He practically fell out of the passenger seat and stumbled off toward the field, vanishing into the rain within seconds. It was coming down so hard, I could barely see him once he got 10 feet away. And then, the moment he disappeared from view, I remembered something. There was an umbrella in my back seat. So I sat there for a moment, engine running, rain hammering against the windshield. But then I figured I might as well take advantage of the stop too. So I grabbed my umbrella, locked the door out of habit, and walked off in the opposite direction from where Leo had gone. I found a spot maybe 20 yards from the car, right at the edge where the gravel met the crops. As I stood there, I could have sworn I heard something rustling near the car, something that didn't quite match the rhythm of the storm. Without turning fully, I glanced over my shoulder, but saw nothing. I had the keys in my pocket, and I knew I'd locked the doors. So I brushed it off and headed back. When I got there, though, Leo wasn't anywhere to be seen. I waited a few minutes, then 5, then another 5. Still nothing. I was getting pissed. What should have been a quick 20-minute drive home was turning into a 45-minute ordeal, and I had to be up early the next morning. I was about to honk the horn when I caught movement in the side mirror. Leo was sprinting toward the car, and even through the rain and darkness, I could tell something was wrong. Before he even had the door closed, he was screaming at me to drive. Instinct kicked in. I hit the gas and pulled away as fast as I could, though the downpour made it nearly impossible to speed. Leo's voice was shaking as he explained. While he was relieving himself, he saw what he thought was me, someone standing off to his right. The figure began walking deeper into the field, and in his drunken logic, he assumed I was messing with him, or that maybe I was drunker than I'd let on. So he followed. He said he kept walking after the figure, confused and too drunk to really think it through. But eventually, the person turned around, and that's when he realized it definitely wasn't me. He couldn't see any clear details, but he knew it was someone else, someone who shouldn't have been there. The explanation took maybe 30 seconds, but before he could even finish, I felt the car pull sharply to the right, followed by the unmistakable, gut-dropping sound of a flat tire. Worst possible timing. There was no way I could keep driving. The car was pulling too much. Reluctantly, I slowed to a stop. We were maybe half a mile from where we'd first pulled over. Not close enough for it to feel immediate, but not far enough for comfort either. I snapped at Leo to get out and help, since, in my mind, this was all his fault. But when I rounded the car to inspect the tire, my anger turned to ice. There, jammed deep into the sidewall of my rear passenger tire, was a screwdriver. There was zero chance it got there by accident. Someone had forced it in. Hard. Leo started freaking out, but I barked at him to keep it together. We scrambled to change the tire, rain pouring down, hands slipping, hearts pounding. Every second felt longer than the last. My mind wouldn't stop asking, who had done this and why? With each passing moment, my hands shook harder. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby, watching, waiting. The fear was so thick, it made me nauseous. The kind that doesn't feel like a dream, but like you've stepped right into one. I was just tightening the last lug nuts when it happened. A scream. A woman's scream, sharp, distant, and terrified, slicing through the storm behind us. And that's when everything snapped. Leo froze. My stomach dropped. Because the person Leo said he'd seen in the field was a man. I didn't think. I threw the tools into the trunk, slammed it shut, and dove into the driver's seat. I didn't even finish tightening the spare. I just hit the gas. As the car jerked forward, Leo grabbed my arm, shouting that we had to go back. Someone was in trouble. But there was no way. I couldn't do it. My brain screamed to keep driving. He called 911, giving the operator our best guess at where we were. He was furious, calling me a coward the whole way home. I barely said a word. I couldn't. The fear had numbed me. When we finally pulled into my driveway, the rain still hammering down, Leo and I sat in silence for a while, trying to make sense of everything. He was convinced the scream came from someone being attacked, maybe stalked, by the man he'd seen. He felt guilty, angry that we'd just driven off. But I wasn't so sure. If someone was out there hurting someone else, why puncture our tire? Why deliberately draw attention to themselves like that? To me, that was the most chilling part of all, because it meant that whoever was out there didn't care if we noticed. Maybe they wanted us to. Plus, If there really had been a woman in trouble, she would have seen our headlights when we first pulled over. Why wait until after we'd driven off to scream for help? It didn't make sense. As I tried explaining this to Leo, I realized I was finally putting into words what my gut had been screaming at me since that night. The scream wasn't a cry for help. It was a setup, a lure. Maybe there were multiple people out there, working together to draw us in. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility, but even that theory didn't sit right the longer I thought about it. The more I replayed everything in my head, the less it added up. Who in their right mind would plan an ambush on a random, deserted road at that hour, in the middle of a storm? There was no way someone could have predicted that we, of all people, would stop there that night. Leo and I went back and forth, arguing until the early morning, neither of us fully convinced by the other's logic. In the end, we just agreed to disagree. The next morning, I called the local police station to see if they'd found anything. The officer told me they'd searched the area thoroughly, but there was no sign of anyone. No footprints, no dropped belongings, no evidence at all that another person had been out there. And stranger still, they hadn't found my damaged tire either. That part threw me. Maybe they just hadn't looked in the right spot, I told myself. Maybe it had washed away in the storm. But deep down, I knew that didn't explain it. A few days later, Leo brought up a new theory. Maybe it hadn't been the man who punctured the tire. Maybe it was the woman. Maybe she'd done it to get our attention, desperate to make someone stop. But then why not scream before we drove off? Why not approach the car when we first stopped? Why wait until we were leaving? None of it made sense.